Hey, what's up, music producers? I thought I'd make a follow-up video about processing your vocals in Ableton Live, and I think that these are really important things that if you haven't heard before, you're definitely going to benefit from. And then also in this video, I want to cover some things about octave effects and time-based effects. Right here, we're just going to play the vocal dry. We're going to turn all this stuff off. You'll hear this is a sample in this case, not an original recording. And then I'm going to go over some very important things. So first, let's hear the sample.
There's no time and space that can keep me away from coming back to you.
Now let's turn on the chain.
There's no time and space that can keep me away from coming back to you.
Okay, so obviously a big difference, right? We're going to get into all of it. This has sort of an octave up effect on it, so it's tracking to her vocal. It's got saturation, EQ, compression, and time-based effects. But the big thing before we go over all of that is the sample itself. Now you'll notice when I go down here to the gain area, I'm at -12. The reason for this is a lot of people are going on to, websites like splice.com or whatever, and they're getting samples that are already too loud. They have no headroom on them at all. So you're drag and dropping it into your session and then trying to put plugins on it or trying to mix it, and you literally have no headroom. And a lot of music producers just don't know this. It's not the most exciting piece of advice, but you'll notice that I'm going -12. So I'm totally changing the gain staging to give myself 12 decibels of headroom before I try to mix this into a hypothetical track, right? That's really important. You want to have headroom on these samples, and they're designed to not have headroom because everyone wants to sound really loud. I've actually changed my philosophy about that. When I produce samples for my Patreon members, I tend to not limit them anymore because I'm not trying to be as loud as everyone else. I want you to just have the headroom built in, at least 6 decibels. So I do it a little bit differently when I do my Patreon packs, but yeah, if you're getting stuff off splice.com, stuff is just, it's not too loud, it's just made to be loud, and you have to give yourself back headroom. Another thing that you'll notice is that if you're getting a sample, like a vocal sample, it's probably already EQ'd and compressed. And in my experience, when I've worked with samples, vocal samples in particular, sometimes the EQ curve looks a little bit different. Notice I'm taking away some of the upper mid-range frequencies because I tend to find they kind of overhype them. Notice how I'm also in the maximize mode with EQ8, so I can move things around and get the EQ curve how I like it, That's a big thing as well. And I tend to turn off adaptive Q as well, so I can really shape the curve the way I want. When you move these things around and adaptive Q is on, notice how everything just shifted when I turned it on. It's gonna change the Q when you're moving up or down. And that's a lot harder to work with actually. So you always have to keep going back and adjusting your Q. So I actually tend to turn it off so I can get the EQ curve to work with that particular vocal recording. That's a really big deal sometimes when you're working with EQ8. Otherwise, besides that, as long as you can make it bigger and you can control your Qs, it's a lot easier to work with and get the EQ curve the way you want it. I also tend to use glue compressor a lot of times because it has a nice de-essing effect when you use it. Kind of takes away some of the harsher stuff off the vocal. And sometimes I don't always go full wet. I actually just pump into it. I change the wetness so I have a little more dynamics come back in, and then I adjust the makeup gain. We can hear what that does to the dry vocal. So here's the dry vocal.
There's no time and space that can keep me away. There's no time and space that can keep me away.
So you'll notice we took away some of the harshness, and we're also smashing it with that glue compressor. Has a nice fat sound to it. It's a really great plugin that's stock with Ableton. So if you haven't checked out glue compressor over the regular compressor, it's really fun to check out. And as usual, you can download these vocal chains that I talk about. If you just want to drag and drop the full thing onto your session, you can do that. A link is always down below to everything that I make. But right here, now we're going to get into the octave effect. And when I turn this on, you're going to notice that a tracking octave effect is added to her voice. So without,
there's no time and space.
With,
there's no time and space that can keep me away.
Now the way I'm doing this is using Shifter, which again is another stock plugin within Ableton. And a lot of people will just grab the coarse, which you go up 12 semitones, but a lot of people won't click wide. When you click wide, you can make it way more stereofied. And if you go like underneath 25 cents, it won't go strictly crazy out of tune. It's almost like adding on a chorus plugin built into that octave up effect. But what I tend to do is I kind of shave off some of the upper frequencies because, in my opinion, a lot of times they jump out a little too much with an octave up effect. Like, I'm not trying to have that thing be overbearing. If I turn off these other effects and just have the shifter, you'll notice the octave up effect will be much brighter.
There's no time and space that can keep me away.
It almost has like a thinness to it that can be a little bit disrupting.
There's no time and space that can keep me away.
But when I turn these things on, it gets more tucked in. And this is also because I'm saturating it, which is adding some nice harmonics. Analog clip is there's other ones in here, but analog clip, which is the default one with Ableton Saturator, is really good. And I'm also compressing it to control it and smash it more dynamically than the dry main vocal so that it's not overbearing on the sound. I can sort of tuck in that octave up effect so it's less harsh and less forward sounding.
There's no time and space that can keep me away
when they're together. And then I saturate them together with a similar effect, which adds a little bit of nice harmonics to the sound.
There's no time and space that can keep me away.
And notice whenever I'm using saturator, I pull back output, so the gain staging relatively doesn't change. If anything, I find like when I'm doing this, my vocal chains might take a little volume off of the original dry recording, but it has a nice effect. So without,
there's no time and space that can keep me away. There's no time and space that can keep me away.
And I just find when I do this, it glues together the sound of the two different voices. And it also kind of has a little bit of it's not really a de-essing effect, but it just kind of takes away some of the harshness. It kind of eats up some of that harsh digital kind of sound and just makes it a little bit more pleasing to the ear. And virtually no gain change, And then we get into just a little EQ I decided to do in the middle there. And then we get into the time-based effects. So there's a lot of ways you can do this stuff. I did a previous video that kind of covered this stuff more generally, but this is another cool part of the chain where we're doing the slap delay, a slightly later delay, a reverb, and then chorus ensemble. And the cool thing about these effects is that they're going to add a ton of dimension around the sound, but they're not going to be too huge, like 4 or 5 second style delay sound or reverb sounding. They're just giving a lot of dimension and depth without being super long decays.
There's no time and space that can keep me away from coming back to you.
So those are your effects. And then we turn on with the dry.
There's no time and space that can keep me away from coming back to you.
Now, there's a couple cool things to point out about this that you might not have tried with your vocal chains. Like, for instance, if I take this dry and the chorus ensemble together,
there's no time and space that can keep me away.
When I take the chorus off,
there's no time and space that can keep me away.
It still sounds pretty wide because remember that octave up vocal effect with shifter is pushed out with the wide effect, which you can see over here. But with chorus ensemble, set the width to 200%, and I'm also EQing a little bit after it. It's allowing me to like make the vocal even wider. So without,
there's no time and space that can keep me away. There's no time and space that can keep me away.
It's almost like the vocal just jumped out at you. And this is a cool thing because you can kind of jack up chorus ensemble, and if you EQ out some of the frequencies that are bothering you, and even maybe push up stuff above 10,000 hertz, a lot of that air, you can really make the vocal jump out in a stereo impression. Again, this is basically a mono, it looks like it's stereo on here, but it's basically a mono recording from Splice. So yeah, you can make things just kind of jump out of the speakers like a stereo vocal effect. And then this is a slapback delay. And it's bouncing around because it's on ping pong mode. And again, I'm filtering off stuff where I don't want it. So I want this to be more like a transistor radio effect. So I kind of band pass around 1000 hertz. But this is a different one where it's just a delay set slightly later and it's getting sidechained out. So I've talked about these techniques in a previous video, the first video I did, which I'll link down below, like I said. But these are really cool ways to add dimension to the sound. And like I said, you can just go down. There's a link down below to my vocal chains page where I create these vocal chains all the time, a lot of times in collaboration with my Patreon members who are amazing. And yeah, you can just download them there if you want to check them out for yourself. But here it is without time-based effects.
There's no time and space that can keep me away.
And now we add the effects.
There's no time and space that can keep me away.
So yeah, we've come a long way with this vocal chain sound, and this is just one sound you can do. So yeah, there's some really important general things that people might not know about. You know, the gain staging is really important, and having headroom is really important. And if you're downloading these vocal samples off splice.com or something, everything these days is made to be as loud as possible, including limiting the actual samples, so you have no headroom when you want to put on your effects or your plugins. So that's really important. And then you're going to have to use an EQ based on what you have in front of you. So there isn't any cookie cutter solution with EQ, but this is a really cool chain. I'm going to link it down below along with all my other stuff. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, just leave them down below. Thank you guys so much for your support on Patreon. Make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube and you're new to my stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching, and yeah, have fun making music.